Riyadh. So this is a very dangerous situation on the ground, of course, for all of the people who are living there, but also the Americans who are at these embassies. Right now in Dubai, it's the middle of the night, so that means that there probably weren't staff at the consulate, but we should note that it's always protected, of course, by U.S. Marines around, and so we need to consider that when we're trying to think about what the ramifications of this strike might actually look like. This is just the early minutes, really, after this strike, so we'll learn more as the hours go on. But we should note that, this comes as the U.S. Embassy in the United Arab Emirates has gone on ordered departure. So it has told all of the non-essential personnel who work at that embassy that they are allowed to leave the country. They should be leaving the country right now. But there are many questions for Americans in the region at this moment about what they should be doing. The State Department telling them to leave now. The White House saying that there are efforts underway to get those evacuation flights up and running. But we have not yet seen the U.S. government provide those evacuation flights.
David Sanger, you're with us now, too. Iran is making it hurt.
Yeah. Look, the Iranians have one big mission here. It's survive. If they're going to survive, they have to wait out President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. If they're going to wait out President Trump, it means they need to make it painful enough, long enough that he's beginning to get toward the elections. You're beginning to see significant casualties. And it gets back to that question that Steve Witkoff, his chief envoy, asked about a week before the war broke out during the negotiations. He said, the president is curious about why the Iranians haven't capitulated. Well, the answer is that the whole meaning and purpose of the current Iranian state is to stand in opposition to the U.S. And so it's not as if, even with the loss of the supreme leader, that they're just going to say, well, this is over. So, and they've got other techniques. Cyber, we haven't begun to see anything here in the United States. I hope we don't, but I wouldn't be shocked if we did.
Let's go ahead and actually play some new video that CNN just verified off of social media. This is the U.S. consulate in Dubai, apparently hit by a suspected Iranian drone. You can see a plume of smoke in the background and people in the foreground taking video and expressing alarm over it. David, to something you said about how these Gulf nations will have to endure, there is the question of how much endurance they have, their capacity for doing that. Do they have the ear of the president in the sense that if they go to the United States and they say, we can't do this anymore, would he listen? Would it change the U.S.'s approach?
Well, look, the U.S. is their major patron. 8 months ago, what were we discussing with the UAE? How many data centers we're going to build there, right? So the Iranian strategy at this point is not necessarily to go after U.S. bases. It's to go after the financial engines of these countries and say the price for sticking with the U.S. is high. In public, they have been very supportive of the U.S. so far. In private, they have been raging angry that they weren't consulted on the start of this war to begin with, right? Many of them didn't even know what the start date was going to be. So they feel like they are sort of collateral damage in President Trump's confrontation with the Iranians, which many of them don't think is timed right.
Kylie, how prepared was the State Department for the fallout? I mean, the inevitable fallout. As we saw the buildup of troops, you have to think with the possibility of there being a strike, they would need to be ready for what this could mean.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I do think when it comes to the Trump administration, what we know is that decision making is very centered among a few people. It's not widely dispersed. So when I talked to folks at the State Department over the weekend, as these strikes broke out, they really didn't know that this was the U.S. government's plan, that this was where the Trump administration is heading. And these are folks who are experts in the region and have been, in touch with their counterparts in the Gulf for quite some time now. When it comes to this question of was the U.S. government prepared to assist the American Americans in the region, I think that is a bit of an open question at this point, because there aren't those evacuation flights happening right now. Of course, as I said earlier, the White House said that they are actively working on plans to help Americans in the Middle East return home. But President Trump was asked earlier today in the Oval Office why those evacuation plans weren't in place before the strikes took place. And I want us to listen to what he said.
Well, because it happened all very quickly. We thought, and I thought maybe more so than most, I could ask Marco, but I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked. They were getting ready to attack Israel. They were getting ready to attack others.
So what the president is saying there is effectively that the United States didn't do a whole lot of legwork before these strikes took place because it happened so quickly. The decision making happened and then these strikes went forth. I was speaking with an American who's in the UAE and is trying to get home just today, and they were saying that they're a little bit confused because what the State Department is telling them when you call that hotline that they have put out is that they should stay, quote, to shelter in place, and that they should look for commercial options to get out of the country. Well, right now, those commercial options just aren't flying.
Can we back up on what the president said? The timing of this, from everything that we've been able to determine in our reporting, was that it was the U.S. that chose the timing. In fact, President Trump's initial plan was to strike earlier. Then they went through that last bit of negotiation, you'll remember, which was, about a week ago with the Iranians. I haven't found any U.S. intelligence folks who have said to me at this point, we thought the Iranians were about to go strike Israel or strike anyone else. They are trying right now to make this look like it was a preemptive strike instead of a preventative war. And there's a big difference.
So then what do you make of what we heard from Secretary Rubio yesterday when he spoke to the press and he said, well, we determined that Israel was going to strike, and therefore Iran was going to retaliate not only by attacking Israel, but also by attacking our assets and allies in the region. And so therefore, in a sense, this is a preemptive strike. It certainly makes it sound like it was Netanyahu's decision and not Trump's.
That's right. I mean, at what point did the United States decide that it was going to subcontract its decisions about when to go to war to another ally, even an incredibly close ally? I mean,
your reporting just doesn't show that actually happened.
That's right.
So why?
In fact, this was so closely planned that the CIA gave the data to the U.S. to strike do that initial strike that killed the Ayatollah.
And so then why lie about it?
Well, preemption, under international law, preemption is considered to be a legal step. I mean, I see that you're getting ready to attack me, I can attack first. But preventive war, you're weak, I'm strong, that's not considered to be legal under the UN Charter or under any kind of international law. Now, I'm not sure how much that concerns President Trump and the rest of the administration. Maybe it does. Maybe it concerns many of their lawyers. But in recent days, I think, and Kylie, tell me if you've been hearing the same thing, they're going out of their way to try to create different scenarios under which this was preemption.
That's right. And there's not one singular descriptor or singular story that we're hearing from these administration officials. I mean, you had the Secretary of State on the Hill yesterday explaining in his perspective that, it was because Israel's going to strike, so the U.S. had to strike with them to prevent the U.S. from being further hurt. And when President Trump was asked about that in the Oval Office today, he completely undermined his Secretary of State, saying that's not the case. He, being the president, believed that Iran was going to strike first. We have not heard that there were intelligence assessments to back that up, but that's what the president felt, and so he felt it was necessary for the U.S. to go forth with the strike.
He also didn't say that in his initial taped statement. Right. What did he say? He said, this is a war that we're going to conduct. We then want the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government, which sounded a lot like regime change. Then we heard the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, say yesterday, this is not a war of regime change.
Let's go live to Nick Robertson now, who's in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which itself saw Iranian attacks overnight. Nick, talk to us about concern not only where you are, but across the region as we're watching this breaking news about the U.S. consulate in Dubai. over Iran penetrating defenses.
And specifically able, it appears, to penetrate defenses where U.S. consulates, U.S. embassies are. Last night it was the U.S.